That should be better. Hopefully. I'm going to do a quick sound check because something went screwy and my audio monitoring. There we go. Okay. Yep. Just got stuck for a second. So as I said, I rarely defend Dennis Prager, although there's I rarely spend time defending Dennis Prager. Sorry about that. Oh wow, some special people. Check now. My audio says that there's sound. Okay. Yeah, there was a delay there, and I had the mute button on. But Dennis Prager has done some good stuff as far as a Judeo-Christian ethic and believing in the general code and inspiration of the Old Testament. I have my arguments with him as far as the gospel. I got to hear him with Robbie Zacharias. And so the Cosmic Skeptic has done a lot of stuff. Now, I didn't listen to all of his stuff, and I really need to outline arguments maybe a little better. But it's hard to do the research and outline the arguments, and he really kind of has snide comments in there. And that's why I made the comment about snarky, because I really don't have good responses to snarky. I don't do well with snarky. You list an argument, you defend that argument, and you move on in life. But playing someone's video and making snide comments, well, one, I haven't mastered it yet. But two, I would rather just look at the person's argument rationally rather than make snide comments, which I really don't think is a form of arguing. It's almost, to me, almost like an ad hominem sort of thing where you're just mocking the person. And I don't really find that great. So I did not listen to all of it. I picked two of his arguments that I felt really kind of got on my nerves. By the way, folks, just to let you know, as far as Get Vocal, which I have, and I can't do some of the other things that Patreon would recommend, I'm thinking about like an after video day after party or something where I can actually have you guys on. And I would love to do that. And I can get 4 people on at once and we can talk about the video or some other things related. I tried it this week and I got a woman from Germany and got to talk about spiritual things with her as far as Jesus and tolerance versus believing the gospel. And it was a really great conversation. But I can post at a certain time a link and you guys can actually come in and we could talk about what I'm doing and even ideas and things of that nature and even interact a little bit. And so I'm thinking that might be really a lot of fun. So I'm putting that out there for those who are watching and are into it. And, we can have some folks who aren't like a part of the community. That's fine. But I'm really thinking about that for the patrons and some of the other folks that want to come on board. So you can post your thoughts there if you want to. I don't want to spend forever on personal stuff, so I'm going to get into does Dennis Prager have the 10 Commandments wrong? And then I'll interact with some of the comments, maybe even during the clips, because when he's busy talking, I don't have to be. And so we're going to move in here, and I'm going to get started. Okay, we have our first clip. Now, it doesn't play, so I'm going to go to what I call our Detractors Corner, which is the special corner that I've created so that we can hear our detractor speak for himself. Now, I did cut an edit because he went into everything. And again, some of it's argumentation, some of it's snarky, some of it's assuming facts, not in evidence. And I just wanted to pick 2 things because really it was like drinking from a fire hose. I was only a 12-minute video, and I think he tried to like barrage every single argument he could think of against Dennis Prager and the 10 Commandments in 12 minutes. So I picked 2 clips, and so we're going to listen to the first one. I'm going to bring you to the Detractors Corner. We're not making this up. This is really what he said.
Rectify. So, well, I'll let you take it away, Mr. Prager.
No document in world history so changed the world for the better as did the 10 Commandments.
Which set? Which set of the Ten Commandments, I mean? As it happens, there are no less than 3 versions of the Ten Commandments administered to Moses in the Old Testament, only one of which is actually referred to as the Ten Commandments, and only 2 of which are written onto stone tablets. Now, funnily enough, as it happens, the most popular version of the Ten Commandments, the version detailed in Exodus 20, and in fact the version being presented here, is neither referred to as the Ten Commandments, nor is it written on stone tablets in the Bible. In fact, the version that is called the Ten Commandments and written onto stone tablets is wildly different from the more familiar version and contains things like keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread. 43 Alley has a fantastic video on this. I'll leave a link in the description, recommend that you all watch it. But it's worth noting that the Ten Commandments that Dennis Prager are talking about are not actually the real Ten Commandments, at least not according to this guy.
Western civilization, the civilization that developed universal human rights, created women's equality, ended slavery, created parliamentary democracy, among other unique achievements, would not have developed without them.
Okay, firstly, nobody invented women's equality. Women have always been equal. It's just taken us a bit of time to realise. But slavery, you're really going to bring up slavery? Not only does the Bible not outlaw and not condemn slavery, it actively condones it, going as far as to give you instructions as to how to keep your slaves. Now, I know many people argue that slavery back then in biblical times was more like a kind of work contract as we'd recognise it today. But answer me this, imagine that you got a new job and one day your employer comes over to you and you've either done something wrong or maybe you've done everything right and he's just in a bad mood and he decides to beat you up. Is that okay? Because according to the Bible it is. The Bible says that you can beat your slaves mercilessly as long as they don't die. It's only if they die that you need to... Society of people.
Okay, we're going to stop there. I'm going to come back to you here in the video and bring you back to our section with the actual section here. Now he is going to blather, and he goes, you know, it's interesting how he uses theistic sources to attack theism. But, you know, here's the first thing. It didn't have to be called the Ten Commandments to be called the Ten Commandments. In fact, in the other version he has, if the word commandment appears at all, it's mitzvot, it's not commandment. And so when he goes ahead and says that there are 2, and neither of them were written on stone tablets, I don't think that's totally accurate in Exodus 20. But even if we were to go ahead and acknowledge that, they're not wildly different, and the section on the Passover is not part of the 10 words. Which, by the way, Dennis Prager would know as a Jew, but our friend the Cosmic Skeptic doesn't know. When Jews refer to the 10 words, they refer to a list of commandments with a imperfect second person and the negative particle in front, and there's a list of 10 of those. So when he goes ahead and says that, I didn't really check him all the way, but I know the Hebrew well enough to know that the Decalogue looks different than the rest of those. And so that's basically, hey, good to see someone in the house. I understand that the Decalogue, which, by the way, that's where we get the word Decalogue, the 10 words, that's what Jews call them, the 10 words, is not really what that's all about. And so it's not wildly different. When you pull up the Exodus 20 section, you will see that, and I actually looked at it in the Hebrew, that after those 10 words are given, there's a section which the people say to Moses, we don't want to hear directly from God anymore because they heard the thunder and the lightnings. And then when you go to the Passover, you'll see a different form there, where it actually says that the Lord told Moses to say these words to the children of Israel. So the indication is that the children of Israel were hearing the lightning and thunder directly, which were the words of the commandments and the giving of those commandments. And then they, out of the awe that God created, told Moses that they wanted him to be the go-between. And that's when you see your Passover stuff. The form of the 10 Commandments is not different in both places. He's not looking at the text to see where pericopes begin and end. Now, our friend the Cosmic Skeptic doesn't really know his Bible very well, it appears. And so it appears as though he doesn't understand how to look at a text. He just lumps that stuff in 20. I don't know that I can pull it up here because Logos is going to really flood my system, but I'm going to go ahead and pull it up on my Logos Bible software. I hadn't planned to spend a lot of time here, but I think that it is important just to kind of say some of that may be his misunderstanding. The Lord spoke all these words in 21. And if I go to the Hebrew, which I hadn't planned to take a lot of time with, but you know, I sat there thinking, where did he get this idea from? Um, and so I'm pulling up Biblica Hebraica Stuttgartensia, and I'm going to the same section, and it's not really difficult to do in the Hebrew. If he knew something about biblical languages and how the Bible worked, he could do it too. V'yidebar Elohim et kol ha-divarim ha'eleh lemor. Now that's distinctly different after you hit the Decalogue and you get through the Decalogue and you go all the way through the Decalogue, okay? And you have your tens, basically, and you get through that. And I'm just going down through here to make sure that I'm in line with my section here. Now, see, in 18, the text changes to Vikol ha'am royim et hakochel. Now, see, if the Cosmic Skeptic had known his Hebrew, he would know that it says, now all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled, and they said to Moses, you speak with us, and we will hear you. Let not God speak to us anymore. Okay? So before you get into that whole section, it says that Moses spoke to the people. V'yomar Moshe el ha'am. Moses spoke to the people. Do not fear, for the Lord has come to test you. And then the Lord said to Moses in 22, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe kol Tomer El B'nai Yisrael. And the Lord said to Moses, thus you shall say to the children of Israel. So there's a clear difference in the Decalogue from verse 22, which includes all these other commandments here. Now, if I go to Deuteronomy 5, and I think I can do this fairly quickly, and I think what you're going to see is that the Decalogue remains the same. There we go. And I'm going to go here, Hadivarim, and I'm going to go to 5, and I'm going to go here to 5. Okay? And it says, and he said, okay, I want to get to the right section here. I'm looking for 6, okay? Here we go. Anochi Adonai Elohim Asher Hotse Ticha Me'or Mitzrayim Mi Beit Ha'avdim. Okay? Now what happens here is the text is there where God says, or he said, and that's God speaking, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So it's God directly talking here. Okay, and you get down to the Sabbath day and honor your mother and father and all this other stuff. Now you'll notice in 22 that the Decalogue is ended with these words that indicate that that the other commandments that come after are not part of the 10 words. Now how do I know that? Because when I go to 22, Eit hadivarim ha'ela deber Adonai et kol hakochelchem. These are the words which God spoke to the assembly. All of them. So the Decalogue is not really different in both places if he knew how to follow the pericopes. Now, I hadn't even included this in the PowerPoint, but I did want to take some time to indicate to you that we're going to see many times that the Cosmic Skeptic is just plain kind of ignorant of Hebrew. Now, he talks about slavery a good deal. I've included a resource. Well, no, we're not going to anymore. I'm sorry, Cosmic Skeptic. We've had enough of that. Okay. Interesting. I'm going to I am following the comments a little, but I'm going to let those go. I do want to say kind of a special hello to folks that I don't normally get to see, because I'm always excited when new folks come. If you're new, hit the subscribe button and hit the like button. I really would appreciate it. Because you know, that is really important stuff. And so I just want to say a special hi to a few folks who I haven't seen for a while. Not that I don't care about all you others. I am so happy to have my dear sister, because she hasn't been able to be with us. So if someone hasn't been able to be with us, I'm like excited when they can be. You know, that's just exciting. Hi to you other folks too. I just see some different names and some folks who haven't been able to be with us, and I want to encourage them. Here's the thing. Let's talk about this. Okay. First of all, slavery is not directly in um, in the Decalogue. Okay. I want to make that clear. Why in the world does Prager bring up slavery? Because the Cosmic Skeptic really has a problem with this. You have to understand that Dennis Prager is an Orthodox Jew. Now, I know the Cosmic Skeptic doesn't understand probably what Orthodox Judaism is even about. A Jewish individual understands that the Ten Commandments are connected to previous revelation. God's not giving commandments to Israel in a vacuum. Okay? And what they understand is that the Ten Commandments are connected to Genesis 1:26, which says that God made man in his image. So Dennis Prager, sorry about the S, understands the original audience and context of the Ten Commandments, whereas the Cosmic Skeptic has not done his homework and does not understand the context of the Ten Commandments to begin with. And so, you know, what I'd say is the first thing is you've made some assertions about the Decalogue, assuming that the laws surrounding the Decalogue are part of the Decalogue and they're different in both places. You also have ignored the fact that the Deuteronomy passage is a re-recitation or a re-explanation of the Ten Commandments. In other words, the Ten Commandments aren't being given for the first time again. They're being reiterated with an emphasis. Since Moses is going to be dying soon, he emphasizes certain things because he's got a lot of history between Exodus and Deuteronomy, and he's not saying things that God didn't tell him to say, but he's taking into account, while he's saying them, what needs to be emphasized. So the Cosmic Skeptic does not understand this. He thinks that when God gives a book, he doesn't work through the human penman, and that if man wrote it, God didn't give it. Now, he doesn't understand inspiration very well. For someone who wants to deal in the philosophy of religion, he's going to have to learn something about inspiration. And so I would say that, you know, he doesn't really understand what Christians understand or Jews by inspiration. But let's talk about the straw man that he creates. That's why I called this Enter the Straw Man. Now, the straw man is a type of argument, and it is an informal fallacy based on a misrepresentation of the other person's position. I actually consider it one of the most odious of fallacies, and I avoid trying to do it. And Exodus 21:20, speaking of Exodus 20:17, is reiterating the commandment. Let's talk about this and let's understand this. First of all, he misrepresents what Pranger's saying. Prager is not saying that we invented women's rights out of some sort of vacuum and that women had no rights before. That's not what Dennis Prager is saying at all. So we need to be clear about this. And I'm going to pull back a little bit. My camera's showing me correctly, but you guys aren't getting it the way I'm getting it. So I'm going to just clarify that. Saying we invented as the right of women were revealed is different from saying we invented that women had rights. Now pay attention to what I'm saying here. What the Cosmic Skeptic has done is reframed Pranger's argument. What Prager is essentially saying is that women's rights being enshrined, okay, in other words, what was revealed or what was invented was actually that we inculcated or enshrined the rights that women were entitled to as image bearers. Okay? That's different from saying we invented that women have rights. So what Dennis Prager is saying is that women's rights were revealed, but he is not saying that we invented that women had rights. Do you see the difference between the two? So he's not really getting what Prager is saying. I think he's misrepresenting what Prager is saying. If you ask Dennis Prager, did women have rights before they were legally enshrined? Were they entitled to those rights? He would say they were entitled to those rights, but we didn't enshrine them in law. So what was discovered was the need to enshrine them in law, but he's not saying that he invented that women had rights. So that's really kind of disingenuous in my mind. What he's really ignoring is that his naturalistic worldview could never have allowed us to discover that women had rights or that women deserved rights. Under Darwinism, the strong should subjugate the weak, and if men could subjugate women, all's the better for them. It's amazing how he doesn't put his worldview under the same scrutiny. Okay, we're going to talk a little more about this, but his worldview would never have enshrined women with rights unless there was some sort of rebellion on women's parts and they could pull it off. So that's kind of a straw man, but there's another straw man here. I want you to see the neat Delbert cartoon I put up. I accomplished nothing this week because I was going through certification. And it's conversation to the boss, okay? And then, you know, how can you say certification is a waste of time? Certification for what? Without certification, management could be reduced to randomness. And the point is that the argument here is an illustration of a straw man. Now, what he's assumed is that God condoned and approved of slavery. This is an argument that doesn't just occur there. I was seeing if I had the book. I did. It's the book Paul Coupon's Is God a Moral Monster? Understanding the Old Testament. By the way, I noticed that he, well, I can understand why he did that. So, you know, he's basically saying that God condoned of slavery, but what he's misstating is the purpose for the passage. And so he's misrepresenting the passage here. No sound? Let me go back real quick and do my usual test. I'm just going to do a monitoring test here and see if I hear myself. I do. So I'm trusting that you do too. So I feel as though this is also really kind of a straw man. Let's look at the passage here and let's understand the sleight of hand. The passage has to do with workman's compensation, and he's right. Work laws. Now, I understand it's not work in the traditional sense that we understand. Let's use an analogy, okay? When this country was founded, individuals wanted to come over to this country, but they did not have the money for passage. So they would indenture themselves for a 7-year period in order to pay their passage to the New World. It was called indentured servitude. Now, I come from Vermont. Do you know in Vermont you have to take an oath before you vote called the Freeman's Oath. What that oath was essentially that I'm not under indenturement while I'm voting. So there's this Freeman's Oath where I'm testifying that I have no indentured servitude hanging over my head, because it was felt that those who were under indenture had a debt to pay. And so what we're talking about is workman's compensation, and the rights of indentured servitudes would be servants would be closer to what's going on here. Now he states that, but he still says God condones slavery. So really, if he understands that, let's take a look at the passage in question. If a man beats his male or female servant with a rod so that he dies under his hand, he shall surely be punished. Notwithstanding, if he remains alive a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his property. Now, I know the property thing is a real problem, but the person is giving themselves in exchange for food, sustenance, and protection. By the way, that's the way feudal law worked also. I've never heard a critique by the Cosmic Skeptic against the feudal system. Under communism, you work for the state. You don't work for yourself, and the state decides what property you can have. I don't see the Cosmic Skeptic going after Bernie Sanders for socialism, which is really a form of indentured servitude to the state. Okay, there may be some buffering going on. Let's look at the meaning. Now, I put these figures up. I'm having fun with cartoons right now, and you got this guy scratching his head saying, you mean the Old Testament wasn't originally written in English? Well, one of the things the Cosmic Skeptic doesn't do is know the original languages. So I stuck the Hebrew up there, because we're going to talk about the Hebrew in its context. All right? You only need to pay attention to the first two words. Now, Hebrew runs right to left. So look at the first two characters before the little line that looks like a dash. Okay, Vikol. Okay, Ish 8, Avodav. Looks like there's an O there. That's what you have there. Okay, Exodus 21:20 is asking a good question. And baloney is a strong word. And even in buying slaves, you're still dealing with some sort of work contract in the ancient world. And when you look at the laws for Hebrew slaves, it is not the same. So it's not baloney. And under what conditions did you buy those slaves? That's how the work contract was initiated. You could indeed get slaves from the subjugated people that you had, but even they had rights. Well, that's a little strong. I'm not going to go ahead and deal with that. I'm going to continue with my presentation. We'll deal with that later. What's important here when we look at the passage, okay, is that the Viki indicates a causal relationship, not a command. Nowhere is God commanding you to beat your slaves. Thou shalt beat thy slaves. That would be command. That's not the form here. Slavery was part of the ancient world, whether you like it or not. What God did was regulate slavery under the Hebrews, and we're going to talk about it to create a slightly different system. So there's no baloney here. You should see what the other laws were like, and I'm not going to be forced out of my sequence. He's setting parameters here. He's not commanding people to keep slaves. Paul didn't command slavery in the Roman Empire. God is not commanding slavery among the Hebrews. It was just a common practice. What God is doing is limiting the amount of evil that could occur. There are two types of ways the Bible talks about things, prescriptively and descriptively. If Exodus 21:20 wants to throw the verse up, we'll deal with it during the question time. We'll look at the actual Hebrew and we'll look at the conditions under which you could have slaves. And then we'll look at the sabbatical year. And then we'll also look at the fact that your slaves got a day off. Tell me that happened in the Deep South. Prescriptive statements are when commands are to be taken. Thou shalt or thou shalt not. Now, Hebrew's very clear about how it does this. If it wants to indicate a negative command that is permanent, it uses the second person imperfect verb with im or lo. Again, I'm suggesting a verse reference so that I can look at the Hebrew and the English. Because simply stating that without a reference allows me only to access the English text. And as we all know, the Old Testament was not written in 20th century English. And so I would want to see what the Hebrew text is doing and what's going on. The reference point for Exodus where he's at is 21:20, which is outside the Decalogue to begin with. Descriptive statements don't have a command form. Okay, at the end of our discussion time, I will pull that up in Hebrew and English. I want to see it in both. And I'll look at it. Now, descriptive statements don't have a thou shalt or a thou shalt not. In other words, when Hebrew is making a descriptive statement as opposed to a prescriptive statement, the Hebrew is actually different. That's what I'm trying to tell you. And the section he has in 21:20, and we're going to, I think we did look at the verse. I'll double back here. But the verse we looked at, there it is, 21:20 and 21. Because the Hebrew lettering is better, okay? Are not commands. That's what I'm getting at, okay? They're God limiting the amount of evil that can be done or what giving parameters to something, but they aren't commanding that you do it. Do you see the difference? Let me give you an example. I think this example is worth sticking with. So if you can hang out for just a second. At the start of a video, there's always a warning that comes up that says, giving me the penalties for pirating, which is 5 years in jail or $10,000 or as much as $10,000 fine. Does this mean the government accepts and approves of piracy? Because it gives me rules about what the penalties for piracy are, then the government must be condoning piracy. Well, if the government's not condoning piracy by creating parameters as far as the punishment, then God isn't condoning slavery by giving parameters around slavery. He doesn't understand what's going on here in the passage. Do you drink your soup with a fork? If you don't bother to understand the story, how do you judge the novel? So let's look at it. The further instructions are there to help us. Now, 21, and we looked at 20 and 21, but what he ignored was 21, 26 through 27, which is further understanding. If a man strikes the eye of a male or female servant and destroys it, and I know that's not a great thing, he must let him go for the sake of his eye. If he knocks out a tooth, now this is only one tooth, he must let him go for the sake of the tooth. I'm not saying a tooth knocked out is bad, is good, but I am saying enough prize fighters have had that happen to them. What we're talking about is workman's compensation stated after this law. The law here is equal to financial compensation because the slave's debt would thus be automatically forgiven, or the foreigner would automatically be released, in which case he could then earn his own money for himself, by himself. Okay? What's the command's purpose? A death blow was to be punished by death. He who smiteth a man so that he die, whether on the spot or directly after, did not matter. He shall be put to death. The general rule was defined by a distinction drawn between accidental and intentional killing. What this law did was prevent the death penalty from immediately being applied to an employer for injury's sake. In other words, the danger was that the minute a servant got injured, the employer would be automatically killed. And that's what God is doing here, is he's limiting the punishment on the employer. Now, Paul Coupon points this out. A rod or a staff is not a lethal weapon, not like a sword. Sorry about that. My software did something funny. What if the servant didn't die immediately from the rod beating, but he died a day or two after? In this case, the master was given the benefit of the doubt that the servant was likely being disciplined and there was no premeditation to kill. Do you see what's important here? The employer's wounding the servant would be treated like premeditated murder, resulting in the instant murder of the employer. So what God's simply doing is avoiding a use of the death penalty for the employer. Now, I'm not saying the employer is doing something great, but God's limiting an evil that would occur in the death penalty being applied too quickly. And so the benefit of the doubt as far as premeditated murder and injury is what's being applied here. And Paul Coupon points this out in Is God a Moral Monster, page 136. By the way, that resource is going to come up later, and I'm going to bring it up, but it's a worthwhile resource to deal with some of these things. I do hope Exodus 21:20 will hang out, because we will get back to his comments. The other thing is, now we get to the issue of slavery. Now, this might be very interesting for Exodus 21:20. What the Cosmic Skeptic seems to ignore due to his 20th century biases, and we'll talk about that, is the Old Testament affirms the full personhood of indebted servants and slaves. Well, at least indebted servants. Let's just go with Paul Coupon's comment. Paul points this out when he says the Old Testament affirms the full personhood of these debt servants. Genesis 1:26 through 29, Job 31:13 through 15, Deuteronomy 15:1 through 18. And so the Cosmic Skeptic never goes to any of those verses and sees the affirmation. Now, when you're talking about the servants here, you may have to differentiate. That's why I want to go to Leviticus, because Israel hasn't conquered any nations at this point. So the idea it's other nations may be interesting in itself. He ignores the background of the Bible. If you read someone else's mail, you cannot expect to be addressed or have the issues you want addressed in a manner that you want them addressed at the level you want them addressed. Now, you see what I'm trying to say here? What God is dealing with is what's going on with the Israelites, not what's going on with 20th century persons. He's dealing with what's going on with the Israelites. And so he's talking to them within their culture and the surrounding nation's culture. Look at this quote here. Are these Exodus laws perfect, universal for all people? No, but in this and other aspects, we continually come across. Now, notice this. Improved legislation for Israelite society in contrast to the ancient Near East cultures. One Jewish scholar, Nahum Zarna, observed that this passage, this law, the protection of slaves from mistreatment by their masters, is found nowhere else in the existing corpus of early Near East literature. And Roxby is raising a great point. See, one of the problems I have with this is the Cosmic Skeptic is complaining that the Ten Commandments don't lead to a better society, while the standards he's applying towards the Ten Commandments are the result of the Ten Commandments being applied to society to begin with. In other words, if your employer didn't feel good and beat you to death, or almost to death, he said, would that be okay? Well, under a Darwinistic society, you better believe it would be okay. Under his naturalistic worldview, it would be absolutely okay to beat a servant to death, because the strong rule over the weak. Survival of the fittest. Law of Darwin. If you were fit, you wouldn't be a slave. You were superior. And so what you need to understand is he's making more complaints about the very standard that allows him to be exposed to and allowed him to grow up within the morality that he's using. This is what I have a problem with neo-atheists. They want to say God is evil by applying the standard that they would never have if God didn't exist. They want to say that morality is subjective, except when they're objectively applying it to God. Well, if morality is subjective, what's your complaint about slavery? What's your complaint about the Ten Commandments? They're already better than anything your naturalistic morality could ever come up with. So your worldview is subject to the same scrutiny that you're giving the other worldview, equal weights and measures. But let's go to the detractors corner and hear another little clip from our friend. I have to get to the detractors corner and go to clip 2. And let's hear the clip from him. Now I want to make sure it's on clip 2. So I'm going to go to 2.
Society of people, it's not moral of me to torture or mistreat them just because I created them. If God wants to tell me how to behave, then he better have a damn good reason for doing so. And saying, oh well, it's because I'm God, isn't good enough. Remember when you were a kid and you used to ask your parents for something and they say no, and you say, well, why? And they say, oh, because I said so. That's what your God seems to be doing, and it's not very helpful.
Okay.
Okay, let's stop there and go back to our PowerPoint. Okay, which I have to do because the detractors corner is the only way to do that. And let's deal with this for a minute. I love that thing. Why would it be wrong to go ahead? Exodus 21:20. I really love your comments. I'm going to have to deal with some of them at the end. I'm just going to have to. Some of them you're going to hear. Okay. Why does God have the right to tell me what to do? Well, actually, I'm going to go ahead and continue to bash the Cosmic Skeptic. Stick around and I'll deal with your objections too. Thank you, Roxby. Roxby's got my point. Great. I love the C.S. Lewis quote. Roxby is helping us understand the attitude and thinking of Satan by demonstrating it. Now, that's pretty strong, but I'm going off a quote by C.S. Lewis. There are two kinds of people in the end, those who say to God, thy will be done, and those whom God says in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it without self-choice. There could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will miss it. Those who seek it will find. Those who knock, it's open. Here's the bottom line, Mr. Cosmic Skeptic. There is a place for people who do not want God. There's a place for people who don't want God. God isn't forcing you to be ruled by him. He's got a place. It's the only place in the universe. And it's a nasty place because God isn't there. And anywhere God isn't can't be a good place. And that's just the nature of it. And so since God isn't there, it's a nasty place. I really don't like being the talking head, guys. I'm going to fix that. I don't know why that does that. So that's the first part of this is, yes, God is not the ogre making you obey him. But if you're going to be fit for the place he's planned for people, then you're going to have to be fit for that place. But let me get to some really good ones. Whether the Cosmic Skeptic likes it or not, the very purpose of humankind is to reflect God. You don't have to like it. It's just true. I don't care that I'm quoting the Bible. Because naturalistically, you can't come up with a teleos for man. Now, I will answer that because someone's talking about annihilation, and I'll tell you why I don't think that's so great. Now, someone raised a good question about hell and omnipresence. If man's purpose is to exhibit God, who knows better how to reflect God than God does? So why should I obey God? Because the teleos of humankind is to reflect God. And God's the best one to tell me how to do that. Okay? The other thing is, whether the Cosmic Skeptic likes it or not, he says, it would be wrong for me to create a society and then torture them. Well, first of all, God's commands aren't torturous. He may have been creating parameters and allowing some evils to continue to exist, but he isn't the author of those evils to begin with. So nobody's torturing people. Okay? When man tortures men, that's people doing evil. Okay? But here's the whole thing. God didn't create a society. God created every human being and the air they're breathing. In other words, Cosmic Skeptic, you're free to stop breathing God's air anytime you want to, because it's his air you're breathing. And I just went to Revelation 4:11. You are worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and exist. By the way, that includes the air and everything else. Got a comment here. God orders to torture people all the time. Well, let's look at one other question. I'm wondering whether that question is something the Cosmic Skeptic would even understand. God came and suffered the very evil of men that he came to redeem them from. I have a really good question for the Cosmic Skeptic. A God that would come and die in order to remove evil and suffer torture himself can hardly be considered an unloving God. Now, let's try to deal with a few of these verses because we have a few. Now, here's the thing. There is no way on earth that I can keep up with 65 people. Okay? So I'm going to ask that I deal with one thing at a time. I think that's fair, okay? Only because I'm one person and a bunch of you guys are great, but the reality is I can't turn to my Bible that quickly. So I'm going to ask Exodus 21:20 to put the Leviticus verse up there so I can see it in Hebrews, because I would really like to see that. I'm going to scroll through and try to find it. We've gone down a few comments, so it's a little hard for me to find here, but I'm going to go up, okay, and try to find the Leviticus passage because I want to look at it in Hebrew and English. Okay, I cannot find this Leviticus passage. Somebody asked for the passage, and I'm sure they put it. Oh, Leviticus 25. Okay, so let me pull this up in Hebrew and English. Now, first thing we have to admit is that God is improving his people over time. He isn't changing everything at once. Because the societies around them were worse, what God does is he deals with people where they're at. Exodus 21:20. He deals with people where they're at. And they were worse, so he limited the evil he would allow in the nation that was supposed to express him to nations that were infinitely, well, okay, not infinitely, exceedingly worse. And he would display his kindness and goodness because they would see a difference between Israel and them. The fact that you're sitting here with all your rights in your comfortable house, based on a morality, by the way, Western civilization is based on Judeo-Christian morality. So all that you're enjoying now, you can thank the Bible and God for, because it would never have developed under a naturalistic world war. Here's my challenge, Exodus 21:20. Prove to me scientifically what set of morals should be followed using nothing but science. So you're enjoying the fruits of something. So he's not an evil lord, because if he was an evil lord, you wouldn't be sitting there. And you wouldn't be enjoying some of the benefits you're enjoying if he was an evil lord. Now, as to slavery, oh, this is the 7th year. Oh, this is great. This is a sabbatical law. So let's go down through the year of Jubilee. So what's the context here? The freeing of slaves and land in the 7th year, so that those who had become impoverished could indeed have their land back in order to go ahead and keep wealth from collecting to one group of people exclusively. Well, it sounds horrible so far. I'm in verse 18. Always got to pay attention to the context of a verse. Okay? And then we have lending to the poor in 35 through 37. Ancient civilizations didn't do that very much. So there's our context. Horrible stuff so far. Now we have indentured servitude in 39. If your brother who dwells with you becomes poor and sells himself to you, notice the self, and you shall not compel him to serve as a slave, okay? And then you have the year of Jubilee again. So far, I'm not seeing what you're talking about, but let's keep going down. Okay. And let's see if we can find the purpose of these laws, because that's the first question you want to ask is, why is this here? And what is God doing? And what are the surrounding nations doing? And what is God trying to get at? Okay. As for your male and female slaves, which you have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy and sell male slaves. Okay, this is limited to the nations that tried to kill Israel. Wow. Okay. So now we're talking about captive peoples who were practicing child sacrifice, burning their children alive for fun, okay, under nature religions, okay, which, by the way, weren't made up God. You know, we made up God. First of all, the only monotheistic people in the world at that time were Jews and converts to Judaism. Okay, everyone else was worshiping dozens of gods, burning their children alive, sacrificing their virginal daughters, yay, treating their war captives far more cruelly. See, if the Babylons got a hold of you and they were mad at you, they would do really nasty things, like go ahead, rape your wife in front of you, just for fun. Here, watch this. Then they put your eyes out, so it was the last thing you ever saw. Really cool stuff. They might go ahead, take your baby infant and dash it so that it's like splat all over some nice stone and say, look at this. Now I'm putting your eyes out. These were the naturalists of the time period, worshiping nature gods. You know, the only difference between them and Carl Sagan is that Carl Sagan believed that the cosmos was a god. They believed that the cosmos was a god broken down into many gods, essentially. Okay, so let's see what we got here. The nations which tried to kill you, which were burning their babies, you may buy and sell slaves from them. Okay. You may buy. Now, who's doing the selling, by the way? This is a good question. The people that are around you are selling their own children. So the alternative then was you let those children die of exposure. Because in the ancient world, if you got like kicked out of your house, you like were in the desert, like in Arizona, without water or food. Check out what condition Ishmael was in at the time. So, you know, so that's kind of where we're at there. So when you say that, you have to pay attention to who's doing the buying, who's doing the selling, who's doing the buying, who's doing the selling, And what were the nations like around Israel? And that's what some of the folks are trying to say. Exodus 21:20 says, human beings created morality, in which case you've got no complaint about anything God does, because if you created morality, then essentially your morality is not objectively true and is grounded in nothing but opinion. So if you say the Bible isn't true and my God's a fiction, I say you have to prove he doesn't exist, absolutely and completely. Otherwise, I have every right, based on properly basic beliefs, to believe in him. That's just a statement that human beings made up God. Actually, human beings didn't make up God, because we'd make up a God like us and he'd look like the Romans. The fact that we made up a God who calls us sinners and holds us morally accountable is the last type of God that man would make up. So interestingly enough, our God would look nothing like the God of the Bible, because we wouldn't invent a God who was going to judge us for doing things that God ended up doing. By the way, you'll notice that God gives people a choice. You can choose him or you can't. And so, basically, the minute you start judging God as evil, what's your objective standard for judging God as evil? And if your standard's subjective, then I don't have to accept your standard anyway, because it's just a matter of opinion. So, and that's one of the problems I have with the Cosmic Skeptic. I think he's being ridiculously contradictory. Man made up morals, but you're using an objective set of morals to say, well, if your boss beat you, would that be good? Well, of course it would be good under an subjective set of morals created under evolution, under survival of the fittest. It would be absolutely great if your master beat you, because he's superior to you, survival of the fittest. And if you die, oh well, you die. So I don't know what you mean by I don't accept yours, that's why I criticize it. And then I don't know where the amen comes in. You're free to believe whatever you want, but certainly it's not a problem with the Ten Commandments that God is improving Israel's society. And certainly God could work with them where they were at and improve their society without necessarily it looking like 20th century society that's been influenced by the gospel for 2,000 years. I'm glad Exodus 21:20 brought up the thing about the child. I've heard this from neo-atheists, and again, it's their ignorance of the Bible. I'm sorry, the word there isn't child. The Hebrew word there is not child. It's not parents beating up their kid. Yaled is the word there for child. And so you got to know Hebrew. The word there can cover a juvenile delinquent, nara, and can refer to a teenager that's burning down buildings and being a young punk and destroying property and flaunting society's laws. So here's the way the law reads. If two parents have a child that they can't control because he's a total moral reprobate, and he's becoming a juvenile delinquent and messing things up in the town and creating no end of trouble, spray painting all over the place and burning property, then you're to take him to the elders of the gate. Why? Because his non-conduct is well known, and the city is now enacting penalties for this child. Nobody was baby killing their babies for crying at midnight. So Exodus 21:20, you don't know the Hebrew. I had this used with a guy. And I pulled out the Hebrew to him and I said, what does this say? And he said, well, if you translate it. And I said, no, wait a minute. You're telling me what the Bible says. Here's the original Hebrew. You translate it for me. So that is, I'm sorry, a red herring argument based on not knowing the Hebrew. Paul Coupon points out that we're not talking about babies there. We're talking about juvenile delinquents that need to be controlled because they are wrecking society. Not about babies and parents killing them for being a little disobedient or young children. And by the way, there's no instance in the Bible of that ever being used. Okay, Exodus 21:20, those sorts of comments are totally ridiculous. Okay, that's insulting. And if you keep that up, someone might need to moderate. We love to have you here, but that's called an ad hominem attack. When you say Jeff's mind is clouded by the hatred that the writers of the mythical scriptures had, you haven't proven the scriptures are mythical. So that's an assertion without proof. Prove to me that the special features of the Bible, and I can give you 10 witnesses that the Bible's true, including consistency within testaments, consistency between testaments, preservation of the text, fulfilled prophecy, Jesus himself and his resurrection. There are many witnesses to the scriptures. Okay, so when you say my mind's being clouded by hatred, that's called an ad hominem argument. It's the last refuge of somebody who doesn't have real answers. Okay? You need to address your arguments to actual texts and actual Hebrew and actual text. Now, if you want to pull out commentaries or use Logos Bible software to help you with the Hebrew, I don't mind that. We have plenty of helps around. Okay? And we have plenty of teachers around who can help with those Hebrew and Greek words. We also have some decent Hebrew English translations, but you have to be a little careful because it says child there, and that makes Americans think of little babies and toddlers. We don't understand that child had a different, the child word there has a different meaning. I think it's very rude and hurtful to compare a Jewish man to a Nazi for defending the Hebrew scriptures. If I wanted to be ad hominem, I could accuse you of some things there because you're talking about a Jewish book to a Jewish man and you're accusing him of being a Nazi. So I think that's a little bit ad hominem and is unworthy of someone who really wants to be, you know, really wants people to look at his arguments. I'm glad to have you here, but no, I was talking about espousing the behavior of Canaanites. I mean, you're welcome to think that burning babies alive is okay, Exodus 21:20, if you want to. I just find it reprehensible. But if you want to argue that burning children alive and sacrificing young women to gods and statues, you know what, Roxby, you would be an excellent moderator for the channel, and I think I was reading up on how to do that. You know, if you want to argue that burning babies is a good idea, and I say it isn't, and you think that's hating Canaanites. By the way, there's a Canaanite who was saved, Rahab. I will have no problem greeting Rahab in heaven. You know, but if you want to make the claim that I'm hating Canaanites by thinking babies burned alive by a culture is a bad thing and that culture is really decayed morally, go ahead. And if you want to argue subjectively, since morality is subjective, that burning babies is okay, I'd say, well, if morality is subjective, you're right. But I don't believe it is. If someone wants to quickly tell me how to make Roxby I was reading up on it, a moderator, I think there's a symbol or something I put in front of her name. And Roxby, I would love to do that. It was great meeting you. Oh, okay. Someone said we're all moderators. Okay. You know, I'm willing to go ahead, you know, and go ahead and say to you that you're welcome to think that. It's not being a Nazi to think that killing babies is bad. It's not being a Nazi to think juvenile delinquents beating up old people is wrong. That's not being a Nazi. At least not by any definition that I can. So, how to select a moderator earlier. She may have, and I was reading up on it, but it just didn't click for me. I'm sorry, Roxby. Okay. I usually volunteer him for tech support. Yeah, I just need the procedure again. I was reading up on it and I just didn't get it. It just like didn't click. But I would love that because it's good to have someone who disagrees. But wow, the Nazi is just a little bit over the top. Right click on the person's name. Okay. Roxby, you willing to do that? I'm out, unsubscribed. Well, we're sorry to see you go, Exodus 2120, and we welcome the conversation. But no, you're not going to be allowed to be calling Jews Nazis. You know, I'm sorry about that. I hate losing subscribers, but there's got to be a limit. It's got to be, I can't do the Nazi thing. I hope you'll consider sticking around. You can only watch the videos you like, and the other ones you don't have to. Okay. Well, I don't know what to make of that, guys. YouTube's not going to like that. What can I say? Wow. Okay. What a night. Okay, well, we kind of dealt with those passages. And this was a pretty heated discussion. I hope that you guys got some positive material out of this. Some of your comments in the background were really good. And I hope that, it looks like you were saying some of the same things. You know, but hey, yeah, I'd definitely be willing to go ahead and do that. I'm definitely up for it. I just would like a moderator who's, doesn't always have to be around, but it's good to have the moderator actually be there. So I'd welcome either Nate or Roxby. You're both great. I've met both of you in person now too, which is even better. I welcome that. Thank you guys. Again, I hope I shared some worthwhile things. And I really hope that, it looks like I was saying some of the same things you were saying. Sometimes you were saying them better, but I hope that some good points were made. It's interesting to me that the gentleman who left is a fan of Cosmic Skeptic, which is kind of sad, really. It's a lot easier to poke fun than it is to go ahead and actually show your worldview holds up. Okay. Well, that was pretty intense. And so, yeah, if Nate, if you make a video on how to moderate, I will be glad to watch it. I'm just going to see what happens if I click on that. No, if I click on that, I just get a save image as. So, I'm clicking on Nate's name just to see if the option came up. And it didn't. It might be in the subscribers list. Okay. I go ahead and do that. But when I click on your name, I don't get the option for moderator. I get open image, a new tab, save image, copy image. So I'm obviously doing something wrong. Okay. Well, hey, at least I ended up putting a rock in his shoe. And maybe that's the best we can do tonight, and hope God uses it. You guys are great. We had some visitors. If you're new, again, please click the subscribe button. If you're not subscribed, please click the like button. If you thought there was some worthwhileness, probably because I hit a nerve, and that might be a good thing. Okay. Oh, wait a minute. I see those dots. Look at this. Add moderator. Well, let me go up to Nate. I've got it figured, Nate. Let me, can I have 2 moderators? Is that like disallowed by YouTube? I'm going to try it and see if YouTube like really gets mad at me. I've always wondered. Let me do this. Okay. Nate 2 is a moderator for my channel. And Roxby is a moderator for my channel now. Thank you guys so much. There you go. You other guys can do some modding too. That's okay. But I actually figured it out. So that's cool. All right. Hey guys, I don't know. I hope I was able to keep my cool. But it's not the first time that a neo-atheist called me a Nazi. So, the Jewish Nazi for believing the Old Testament. I'm not used to that. Oh, good. Excellent. Well, you guys can figure out what like symbols you want. All right. Hey guys, thanks so much. I'm a little thirsty and that was intense. I hope that this turned out to be worthwhile. I think there were some good points made. I really liked going through the Exodus and talking about the grammar a little bit. So, okie dokie. I'm going to call it a night, but I now have 2 moderators. God bless. And I am thrilled for everybody. I'm thrilled for a few of the new faces. I'm going to go ahead and sign off. We had a full show, and we had some fireworks to go with our television. We just needed, like the popcorn, right? So that's cool. Batman needs... Okay. You guys are so fun. It's like amazing. So I'm going to stop screaming screaming. I'm going to stop streaming. Okay. I'm going to just like a special thanks because hi and thanks. I haven't seen this person for a while, but I have seen them occasionally, and it's exciting. So let me get this in while I can, because I just love it when people visit. But I'm not going to do my Mr. Rogers, who are the people in your neighborhood, because that wouldn't be cool. But I'm old enough to remember Mr. Rogers. Isn't that scary? Okay. And I'm just going to do this real quick.